Marx said about his pen pal T.S. Eliot after his death that he was a nice man, and that that was about the best that could be said about anybody. When 100 years from now Groucho Marx dies, they will say about him that he made a lot of people happy. And that's my version of the best thing that can be said of any man. The movies are classics: Animal Crackers, A Night at the Opera, A Day at the Races, Go West. After the movies, he went on to do a couple of scenarios and to act as quizmaster of his own TV program, which won all the awards. His specialty on that TV show was impudence and a fairly genial rudeness, which he has practiced all his life, and which he has collected in his most recent book, The Groucho Letters, in which we are made privy, a word he doesn't, by the way, like, to an exchange of lucubrations between him and the elite, artists, politicians, poets of the English-speaking world. In a letter to Eddie Cantor in that irresistible volume, he records that the two greatest laughs he ever got, or rather most reliable laughs he ever got on vaudeville, were in response to the line, "The garbage man is here," to which his reply was, "Tell him I don't want any." And to the line, "I'd like to say goodbye to your wife," to which the reply was, "Who wouldn't?" I'd like to begin by asking Mr. Marx, do you mind if I call you Mr. Marx?
I wish you'd call me Groucho.
All right, I will. Whether the...
I'll call you Willie.
Fine.
It's good enough for Somerset Maugham. I don't know why it isn't good enough for you.
I certainly wouldn't want you to start being polite on my show. Whether the laughs those two lines got on vaudeville is a cue to the question, is the world funny?
Ladies and gentlemen, in a moment we shall hear Mr. Marx's answer to Mr. Buckley's question. My name is C. Dickerman Williams, and I shall act as chairman of this discussion between Mr. Marx and Mr. Buckley. The subject of the discussion will be, is the world funny? Mr. Marx, would you answer Mr. Buckley's question, is the world funny?
He didn't ask me, you just asked me.
Would you answer my question?
No, I don't think it's terribly funny, you know. I don't think it's ever terribly funny. Sometimes there are isolated pieces of the world that is funny, but generally it's a pretty serious world. It always has been. It's people struggling for a living and starving and all kinds of riots, and particularly a couple of weeks ago. No, I don't think the world is funny. It's like saying, is a man funny? Even a professional comedian can be funny perhaps 8 minutes out of about 24 hours. But a comedian isn't. They're the dreariest people in the world. You should talk to my wife sometime, which is more than I do.
Is that an invitation?
Mr. Buckley, what's your view?
Well, I've read Mr. Marx's book and a couple of his books, and I've seen all of his movies. I think that he does his best to make the world funny and occasionally succeeds. But it does seem to me that there is a strain of something going through your last book, for instance, all of those letters that you write to all of those famous people and that you receive from all those famous people. And that theme is something very close to misanthropy. It's related to the whole notion that everybody would like to say goodbye to their wives, that the world doesn't appreciate you, that the world is sort of a perpetual ambush.
No. Pardon. That's a French word, isn't it?
Yeah.
It is.
No, I never said the world doesn't treat me
Page
well.
108 from your book. The only reason my appearances are rare, and this is something I don't usually disclose, is because nobody asks me oftener. That sounds to me pretty plaintive, doesn't it to you, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
I am essentially a very sad man.
Yeah,
so why do you ask me if this is
make.
a humorous world we're living in?
Well, because you've devoted your professional career to trying to stress the humorous aspects of it. Now, is this a circle-squaring expedition?
I have constantly failed in amusing the general audience.
You haven't. Now, maybe you're just feeling sorry for yourself again. But when you get letters from perfect strangers, each of them
celebrated
is the word.
As
no, it's hardly threatening when they ask you for your picture.
No, I'm a kind of a lovable old...
Yeah. Well, why are you so lovable?
Is because I'm essentially a...
Oh,
No, seriously, folks, they always say that, you know.
Yeah.
And television, they always say seriously, folks, when the comedian has
failed.
delivered a joke and hasn't had a laugh. Then he says, seriously, folks, to try to avoid this joke and get on to something more interesting, hoping the next thing will be a joke. I'm through for the day. Now, you go ahead.
Well, seriously, folks, what I'm trying to say is, isn't it true that this sort of spontaneous fraternity of Groucho Marx fans grew up on account of the fact that you successfully stressed certain aspects of the world and made them perhaps funnier than they are? Now, do you regret having succeeded in doing so? Do you consider it a profanation of reality?
I would say that I'm a kind of alter ego. I think between what I have invented myself and what the writers have written for me over the years, I have said the things that no one else has dared to say publicly.
Why? Why?
Because the audience loves it. If you have a general, like I had General Bradley on the quiz show, he's a nice man, very nice man, and might even conceivably be a good general. But I kidded them all through the show, and the audience loves that because they don't get a chance to do that to mayors or politicians or bank presidents, people like that. And people enjoy that because nobody else does that.
Well,
it doesn't have to even be funny. It has to be a lack of respect for somebody who is important.
Yeah, but it's very healthy, isn't it?
Yes, it is. There's not enough of it.
That's right, because that is the way things in fact are, right? Your point is that five-star generals can, under certain circumstances, be ludicrous, right? And,
well, they are when they're engaged in battle.
Yeah, or on your show.
Mr. Marx, is your point that mockery is basically funny?
Is basically funny?
Yes.
Yes, I think so, but I don't think there's enough of it. I think most comedians go on the stage in order to please their audience, and I never did. I said what I wanted to say, and it was up to them if they liked it, and if not, go to another theater.
Yeah, but your point is that what you wanted to say was things about the world as you understood the world, say, roughly speaking, the truth, correct? Well, why did you write in one of your letters, actually the cigar's a phony, so is the mustache, incidentally, so am I?
I don't recall saying that, and you, as the judge here at this moment, having a legal background, I wish you, I'll take a fifth on that. Because have you got a fifth on your back pocket? That's
are you going to object as incompetent and irrelevant?
Yes.
It was a letter written to...
Strike that out.
Elaine Dundee.
I said what? That
Said,
was Tynan's ex, wasn't it?
That's right. That's right. But anyway, maybe you were feeling odd that day.
Particularly morose, perhaps?
Perhaps.
I don't know.
Which raises the interesting question, why did you include it in a collection 10 years after you wrote it? However.
I don't remember.
Yeah.
I don't remember how I felt 10 years. I don't remember how I felt this morning while I was waiting for a crust of bread in a Chinese restaurant. They think a crust of bread is a bag of rice. It may be true at a wedding, but it's not when you want to have breakfast.
Well, it's terribly important to forget some of those things, isn't it?
To forget things?
Yeah, for instance...
I think it's one of the most important contributions you can make to your own existence.
So you have forgotten that at one point you were driven to say in a letter that you thought of yourself as a phony.
I still regard myself as that.
Oh, then you've changed your mind again. You've forgotten what you said a few minutes ago.
Why does a man have to stick to one thing just because he said it once?
Well,
this is the nature. I think you have to have an open mind and say anything.
No. I know that you're a political liberal, and as a matter of heroic self-interest, you're required.
I don't know what you mean by a political liberal.
Well, I'm using your term here.
Although I've forgotten what I was.
I noticed that you voted for Wilkie in 1940.
Yes, I did vote for Wilkie.
Well, why were you against FDR? What had he done to offend you in 1940?
What era was that in FDR's life?
Well, you only ran once, 1940.
FDR ran four times, I know, but
you
what
couldn't
time
vote for
of
Wilkie
this?
more than once.
I voted against Roosevelt the last two times he ran because I'm opposed to any man running more than two times for president. And the fourth time he ran, I thought was one of the most impudent statements, and I haven't got the right word, for him to go to Europe. He was deathly ill, and he was playing around with a couple of giants over there. And I thought that was unforgivable. I think he should have resigned, and I don't think any man should run for more than 2 terms, and many of them for only 1.
And many of them not at all.
And most of them not at all.
Most of them not. Well, but I
This
don't...
is the Garden of Eden for incompetence. The whole political life. And this lawyer. Who I'd almost forgotten in my...
You want me to rule on that proposition?
Yeah, I want a ruling, but not from you. I want it from an impartial source. Mr. Buckley, for example. You know that he blushes and he seems so tough, you know, when you watch the show? And he's constantly blushing. He's like a young girl.
You haven't said anything nice to me that I should blush about. But let me ask you, though...
This is a permanent blush, I think you have.
Maybe it's a permanent blush, yeah. Although I didn't spend as much time in makeup as you did.
I happen to be making a play for the wardrobe lady in there.
Was she funny?
She gave me all my material. She wasn't water, she was the makeup woman. The one that was bending over here before in an extremely seductive position.
Did you succeed?
No, I didn't.
Counselor.
Did
really?
you?
I won't tell.
But what about...
You know that this man was the Attorney General for President Taft?
No, no, no. I must disavow that.
Well, something like that.
Law clerk, the humbler role of law clerk.
Humbler, like Bobby Baker, you mean?
No, not that kind of humility.
Anyhow, he's a fine man, he's a gentleman, and a scholar. He's one of those 3. I don't know which one it is.
They're mutually exclusive?
Usually, yes.
Tell me, Mr. Marx,
Why
Groucho.
nights are lonely? Is that what you're going to say?
No, I wasn't.
There used to be a song, tell me why nights are lonely. I have an answer to the fellow who wrote that.
Presumably aren't lonely because I see that you wrote at one point that with patience you might become the next Tommy Manville. So I'm not worried about your nights
Tommy
at
Manville?
all.
There's still a likelihood that I may beat him. What has he had, 11?
In the next 100 years.
No, no. I would never get a divorce again, even if I didn't like my wife.
This is not something you're likely to forget.
I'll never forget the last 2 alimonies.
Oh.
And I said to my wife, if I came home unexpectedly and found you in bed with the gardener, I wouldn't be pleased, but I would never get a divorce again. There's an old joke about 2 fellows were discussing what is the difference between satisfied and contented. And the other fellow said, well, there is no difference. And the other man said, yes, there is. Now, I'm satisfied that right now my wife is home with another man, but I'll be damned if I'm contented. I thought that would certainly get a bigger laugh than that, but it is not easy to make seats laugh. Unless you have a laughing seat like that the makeup woman had.
That last sentence, I hope you noticed, was the type of joke where you just take 2 objects and twist them around. This makes a very funny routine, correct?
Yes.
I'm quoting one of your letters from your instructor.
Are you trying to pry into my private comedic secrets?
Is everybody...
Gentlemen, I'm afraid we must interrupt.
Which
Mr.
is
Buckley
the
will tell us
gentleman?
later.
Will you please identify the gentleman?
Groucho...
Dear, if you don't mind.
Yeah. You show, I think, a sort of a healthy resistance to much of the sadness that makes up for your kind of humor. I'd like to hear your comments on it. I mean that quite seriously. For instance, you wrote at one point, I had no idea that this war, you were referring to the Second World War, would dare disturb my private life, and I may have to write a letter to the London Times. And on another occasion, he said, I've often wondered why people drink. It's gradually beginning to dawn on me. Now, there is that long tradition of the tragic comedian. They used to say it about Garrick, for instance, did they not? And do you consider that it's absolutely essential for the success of humor, which is, after all, sanity, to constantly observe the unfriendliness of the world and of nature and of many human beings?
Well, it's a hard question to answer because it's a very long question. And if you were to repeat the first 6 words, during the Second World War, you mean the one with Hitler, I was playing camps and hospitals with a troupe. I had a troupe. I was a kind of a minor Bob Hope, except that I never got any publicity because I didn't want any. I wasn't doing it for that reason.
Was Hope?
I think Hope has to work all the time. I think he has to appear someplace. And if he didn't get paid, he would do it anyhow, because he's that kind of a personality. And he's very talented and a nice man. But I think this is the only thing he's interested in, is appearing, whereas this isn't true of me. If I wasn't selling a book now, I wouldn't appear here. I admire your show, and I watch it frequently whenever I'm home. But I'm not crazy about acting. I always liked writing better than acting.
Are you acting now?
No, not at all, no.
Well, then why did that...
I'm completely ill at ease.
Well,
Do I strike you that I'm acting right now?
No. That's why I was surprised that you used the word.
I was sad about the Second World War when I would go through the hospitals and try to sing funny songs, and the boys are lying there without legs and without arms, a lot of them, and it's not very funny, and it was a very difficult job to do because you would have to steel yourself to this ordeal. I played in Washington to a whole audience of what is known as basket cases. No arms or legs. It's very tough to be funny under those circumstances, and they were a wonderful audience. But
well, what did you have to stress in order to be appealing to them? That is to say, people who are face to face with horror in their lives. How do you successfully communicate with them and make them laugh?
I did the same act I did anyplace else. Yeah. But humor is humor, and if it's basic, they laugh at it, that's all.
Mr. Marx, do you think there's an aspect of escape in humor?
Oh, of course there is. Of course there is. I think if it wasn't for that, I think most everybody would commit suicide. There must be things that you have to laugh at. And I know my brothers, when we were together, it was always when things were most disastrous that we laughed the most hysterically. Maybe it wasn't even true laughter. It may have been kind of insane laughter, but that's when we laughed the most. I must tell you about an incident. I was coming into Chicago on the train, and we were going to play the Palace Theater. Zeppa was in the act then. And about 50 miles out of Chicago, I got pains in my side. And then when I got to the hotel, I had 3 doctors look at me. It was the appendix, and it had to come out immediately. So they took me to Michael Reese Hospital, and Zeppa went on, who was the straight man, he went on in my place. And I picked up the Chicago Tribune the next morning, review by Percy Hammond, said Groucho was never as funny as he was this afternoon at the Palace Theater. Mm-hmm. And I was scheduled to stay in that hospital for a week, and I was out in 3 days.
So that you, well, in other words, you're simply recognizing the therapeutic effects of laughter, which I think most people do. Well, how do people without a sense of humor endure?
Because they don't know what's going on in most cases. I think most people, I think a very small percentage of America is literate, educated, and hep, and knows what's going on. I think it's improved in recent years because of television. People like you and documentaries that you see, and Frank McGee, and all kinds of, those 2 boys who say goodnight to each other every afternoon.
You think it has improved on account of television?
Oh, unquestionably.
A few years ago, you wrote to one of your friends, a child's mind must inevitably rot looking at this dreary procession of nonsense night after night. And I think that the next 10 years will produce a population composed entirely of goons.
This is true, but I think that the networks got wise to this and decided they better put on something on there, or the FCC. Is that the FCC?
Is what the FCC is?
I mean, who control
Yes,
television.
I'll rule in your favor on that.
FCC. Well, I think they'd have probably closed the whole thing up or taken it over themselves, because the protests were getting louder all the time. And who was this fellow who 3-4 years ago who stole a line of T.S. Eliot, and he termed television the wasteland? I eventually accused him of this. I met him at a restaurant one night. I says, you're very talented and very brave, but why do you have to steal T.S. Eliot's lines when he happens to be in England? Anyhow, well, I must tell you about T.S. Eliot.
T.S. Eliot didn't invent the word wasteland.
It had never been used generally, I mean.
Well,
I didn't hear anybody in the street. I'd walk down the street. I never heard anybody say TV is a wasteland. Did you?
Well, TV didn't exist in the 1920s.
I'm talking about 10 years ago.
He didn't make up the word.
He didn't make it up, and he used it well.
But it was in dictionaries that appeared before T.S. Eliot was born.
This is quite true.
Yeah.
And I don't mean
so that wasn't exactly plagiarism.
No, but T.S. Eliot made up other words, too. Some of them I don't even understand. I dreaded going to his house for dinner because I thought he was going to talk about the wasteland and proof rock and all these things. Huh?
You wanted to talk about King Lear.
I wanted to talk about King Lear, and he didn't want to hear about Shakespeare. I think he was jealous.
You want to talk about animal crackers.
Yeah. He did. He spent the whole evening with my wife talking about our old movies. Yeah. I had nobody left to talk to because his wife was there. I didn't go all that way to talk to his wife. Since I was not talking to my own wife, there's no reason why I should talk to his. He's a nice man. He wrote me a letter. I think it's in the book, in which he said I had given an interview to a whole group of reporters in London. They asked me why I was over there, and I said I came over to have lunch with T.S. Eliot. And he read this piece in the paper, and he wrote me a letter, and he says, you have no idea what this has done for me socially. The greengrocer and the butcher and all the various tradesmen in the neighborhood now bow deeply when I pass, just because they know you're coming to my house for dinner. Incidentally, I had a terrible dinner.
Well, you lied to your brother Zeppo. You wrote him that you had a very good dinner.
Well, I did.
That the meat was very well cooked.
Yes, it was. It was overcooked, too. But he was charming. He served the wine, you know, as though, I think he had a butler, a man, but he didn't use him that night.
Is it your
yes, he wanted to drink in my beauty, I think.
Is it your impression that T.S. Eliot found the world funny?
Not in his later years. Perhaps when he was young. He had a kind of an impish sense of humor. You know, I spoke at the memoriam when he died.
I did.
Did you know that?
Yes, I did.
And I was scared to death. I was scared to death because on the bill was every first-class English actor on the show. First place, I walked in the theater in the afternoon, it's pitch dark. And I hadn't meant to go to the theater at all. But I said, maybe I better take a look at this place. It's a huge theater, and it's run by Olivia and Kenneth Tynan. So I walk in the theater, and it's pitch dark, and I sit down in the front row, and I sat right on Olivia's lap, because she couldn't see anything for about 5 minutes. So they says, what are you doing here? I said, well, I don't know, I'm kind of nervous about what I'm doing tonight. It's difficult to be funny at a memoriam. So he says, well, why don't you get up and do your act? Now, here's an empty theater with nobody there but Olivia, England's greatest actor, and Tynan, the toughest critic in England. And I did the whole act, and then I looked at him kind of mournfully, I guess was the word, or appealingly. And they says, that's fine, that'll be fine tonight. But I got off great that night. I walked out on the stage, and I'm the only comic on this whole show. The rest are all reading T.S. Eliot and Shakespeare and other things. And I said, me coming out here at this memoriam this evening, a huge crowd there that night, I said, it reminds me of the old vaudeville act that this fellow was going to be hanged. And they had put him up on the scaffold, and the priest or the minister, whatever it was, he came out and he said, have you got any last words to say before we spring the trap? And this fellow says, yes. He says, I don't think this damn thing is safe. And it got such a big laugh because there was a kind of a funereal overtone of this whole show anyhow, that after that they accepted. And then I did some poems of Eliot's. Judge, what do you got to
Gentlemen,
say?
I'm sorry, we
must
have another break in the discussion.
Oh, well, that's unfortunate. Familiarity.
Say, Groucho...
Don't go back to that book again and catch me lying somewhere.
I wouldn't do that.
Take a fiendish delight in humiliating me here.
You said a while ago...
There he goes again.
No, I mean right here.
What about Willie? Do you object to Willie?
Not at all.
Because Somerset Maugham was called Willie, and when he was 80 years old. Somebody once said to him,
told me that when I'm 80 years
why
old.
don't you quit smoking cigarettes? When Mom was 80, he was a two-pack man. And some reporter said to him, why don't you quit smoking cigarettes? And he says, have you got anything for me to replace it? And I think it's a very good answer when a man is 80, or even 79. Now, what were you going to ask me? Judge, you'll have to forgive my rudeness.
Go right on. Go right on.
Go on,
I don't find it rude. I find it in order. Continue.
Isn't he charming, huh?
You like
What a
it?
great federal judge he
That's
was.
right.
Yes.
I think I'm going to be finding it difficult to get impartial justice with this cooing going on here. No, a while ago
Why
you
don't
said
you
that
wear a
there wasn't
bikini?
anything, that there wasn't anything that you didn't feel that you could joke about. But as a practical matter, aren't there a lot of things that people resent humor being applied to? For instance, a while ago, you told me a story involving Eichmann. Now, this is not a story.
Oh, that's a wonderful joke.
Yeah, but it's not
that's
a
a
story
joke only for people in show business.
Yeah.
Because you've had to have been on the road with a show that's in trouble
Yeah.
in order to...
But this, as I say, this isn't a joke that you would want, obviously, to publicize.
Of course I would, but the public wouldn't understand it. I would love to publicize that joke.
Why don't you try it? Go ahead.
Try it here.
All right, shoot.
Try it here. It wasn't my joke, and I'm embarrassed that it wasn't. But somebody, a writer, a very good writer, I can't think of his name, his father's a barber. That's got nothing to do with what I'm talking about, but it gives it a nice basic foundation.
What was his mother?
He had no mother. That's why his father was a barber. He was getting clipped in his own way. At any rate, I'd have to explain that whole thing to the audience. Those are not show people. They wouldn't understand that joke. But I'll tell you a joke about George.
Why did you tell it to me?
Because you're virtually in show business. I regard you as an actor. You're not a philosopher or a mayor. You're not even a mayor.
No, I know that.
I admire
I very much
I admired you for that. I thought it was wonderful. And if I had lived in New York, I'd have voted for you. I would have. Because I think you said a lot of things that should have been said and nobody else said them. Because you weren't a politician. And it was great. And that's one of the reasons I'm here tonight, and also to see the judge. The judge and I have an appointment later in Samara.
Well,
Now, I'll tell this story about George Kaufman.
Okay, go ahead.
There's a man named Bloomingdale. It's a big department store in New York. It's like Macy's or Gimbel's or something. And he's the son of one of the family. And he had a desire to go in show business. And he produced a show, and it was a terrible show. And they sent for George Kaufman, who was considered at that time the play doctor. So he went down to Philadelphia to see the show, and after the show was over, Bloomingdale came down the aisle and says, George, how do you like it? He said, have you got any advice to give me? And he says, yes, I have. He said, tell you what you do. Close the show and keep the store open at nights. Now that, even they can understand.
Yeah, but that doesn't come into the category of taboo jokes, does it? Well,
You mean I should be kindly to Eichmann?
Let's take a very specific situation. No. My point is that Eichmann, I'm using him simply as an example, conjures up such horrible thoughts that a lot of people find it impossible to bring their senses of humor to front and center. And
I laughed heartily when he was hanged.
well, that kind of thing, yeah.
Yes.
That's sort of a form of gallows humor.
Certainly would.
And
I think he had it coming.
Yeah.
And I'd like to see NASA hanged.
Yeah. Jokes, for instance, isn't it true that certain jokes, that at least what were considered jokes 10, 20 years ago, are now unsayable as a result of certain tensions that exist. For instance, certain racial jokes. Mm-hmm. You couldn't have a minstrel show now, could you, in Hollywood? No. Do you regret this?
Well, I liked minstrel shows because I was brought up in that era. But I think it's wrong today. I think the colored people have such a struggle today that I don't think there should be any jokes connected with them.
Well, but then shouldn't it also be said that they oughtn't to have been Irish jokes back when they were having a terrible time and dying like flies in Ireland? There shouldn't have been Jewish jokes when they were fighting their way out of the ghettos and so on and so forth.
I still resent Jewish jokes publicly. and Irish jokes, and Catholic jokes,
Well,
and all kinds of jokes.
Did you ever tell Jewish jokes yourself?
I never said a Jewish word on the stage in 50 years.
I didn't say a Jewish word. I said a Jewish joke.
No. I might tell you one when the show's over, but I never tell them publicly.
Oh, now this is
I
what
don't
want to
regard
hear.
myself as a Jew when I'm publicly performing. I'm an actor. Maybe a bad one, but I'm an actor.
Well, in other words, out of a sense of deference to people who would not consider them funny, you wouldn't say them to a general audience. You would only say them to somebody who
I
whose
liked
reactions
and knew.
you tested and knew.
And would understand it.
Yeah.
I resent Myron Cohn
I
with
don't
that
know.
long farrago of Jewish jokes. I think the Jews should have a dignity now, the same as the Catholics and the Protestants.
Well, but
I must tell you what
no,
Nutley
no,
Johnson...
but wait a minute. I don't want to get off this because
Okay.
isn't it a sense...
I knew eventually you were going to make this serious. We were having fun before. Why don't you keep it that way?
Well, tell me if it begins to hurt.
No, it never hurts. I'm proud of being a Jew, particularly after week before last. How do you feel, Judge?
So do I.
You have no animosity towards we people, do you?
No.
Isn't he a charmer? You're crazy if you ever lose
What I want to know
him.
is this.
He's a big asset on your show, Willie.
Yeah, I agree.
You should keep him on there.
I agree.
You know, so
I'll
many
lend him
people
to you,
said
yeah.
to me, when I said I was going on the Buckley show, they said, gee, let us know when it is. They thought we were going to have the damnedest fights up here, politically and every other way. And it's all nonsense. I don't feel that deeply about politics. Or about anything else at my age. I'd be silly.
Well, you feel pretty deeply about the subject we just touched. At least
Disparaging people,
That's
I
right,
think
you already did.
publicly, I'm opposed to.
But isn't it sometimes considered a sign of a sense of security by people that they can tolerate jokes about themselves?
Let's say
For
Jewish
instance,
jokes.
Or no, say
Now,
the
let me
royal-
stop you for a
say
minute.
Say the royal family in England. They wouldn't much object to a joke involving the royal family because
Why
it's a
should
secure
they? They
institution.
have most of the money in England.
That's right.
And all they do is put down flowers on statues.
Yeah. So it's
Same as the pigeons do.
So it's secure, right?
Yes. Let me tell you something. 4 weeks ago, when NASA says, I don't want to defeat Israel, I want to erase them, that's when I feel sensitive about jokes about Jews. Conceivably, we could have been erased over there. And I think that'd be very bad for the world.
Well, I haven't...
We would have lost Chrysler and not Chrysler. I don't mean the automobile. I mean a lot of great men.
Oh, yeah. No, I happen to agree with you.
How do we know how many were burned up in
That's a little bit
Germany?
off the point, isn't it?
Hmm?
That's a little bit off the point.
No, I'm very sensitive about ridiculing Jews or any religion, and that's why I'm opposed today to the minstrel show.
Yeah. And I am saying, therefore, I understand you to have said two things in the last few minutes. One is that humor is a tonic that works even in desperately sad situations. You talk about you and your brothers laughing hysterically sometimes when your grief
Not at our
is at
act.
high pitch.
I mean, off the stage, we laughed hysterically.
Yeah, I know. But for some reason, you feel that that kind of laughter is not something that you can play with in front of an impersonal audience because you are liable to step on a very sensitive conscience. Is that right?
Let me ask you this.
Yeah.
Let's say it had been reversed, and NASA had decided he was going to wipe out the Pope and the whole Roman hierarchy and Catholicism and everything else. Would you want jokes about Catholics publicly on television?
My own feeling is that I distinguish by the context. I'm a Catholic and a member, therefore, of a minority group, and I distinguish...
A minority group?
by
Where
the-
is this? You're being facetious.
Well, certainly in Hollywood.
Not in real estate. Oh, come on now, Willie.
But I distinguish between the
I'm
context
older
of
than
the
you.
joke.
Judge, will you give me an impartial answer on that?
I distinguish between the context of a joke.
Yes, you
there
will.
are people who say jokes and you feel an invidious zing in them, and those I'm on guard against. There are others who are totally wholesome about it. I think these are the relevant distinctions.
Do you
to be
think
made.
NASA's
I think
statement-
I think certain people could put on a minstrel show without it saying anything about the dignity of the Negroes, but I think that if it was the kind of minstrel show that would be put on by, say, Llewellyn Wallace and George, it would be saying something. The one kind I would resent, Al Jolson's I would not resent. George Wallace's I would, quite apart from their professional qualifications.
Now, I wouldn't object to a Negro troupe doing a minstrel show, but today I would object to a white group doing it.
Well, now, why do you not object to a Negro telling, in effect, Negro stories, but you do object to a Jew telling Jewish
Because
stories?
the Negroes are doing it of their own volition.
Well, what about a Jew who does it of his own volition?
No, but the
Myron
Jews...
Cohen, for instance, or whoever he is.
I
I've never
loathe
heard of
him. I loathe him.
You made that clear, yeah. But why do you loathe him? Because, and if you don't loathe a Negro who participates in the
If he
minstrel
wants to
show?
do it himself, I think he should be encouraged to do it. Bring back
You're not
Negro
making
humor for the Negroes. But for the Jews, it's an entirely different thing. He has no place to live. He's been chased out of every country in the world. Torquemada, Hitler, Nasser. When a man says, I'm going to wipe out, erase a whole group of people, I think that's pretty bad.
Gentlemen, I'm sorry, we'll take
Gentlemen,
another
who are
break.
you referring to?
I'm referring to you.
Thank you, Judgy. You're a real cutie. And we'll go far in your chosen
In the
profession.
legal profession, yeah.
Which I think is
Right.
being a
May I
ham
quote
actor.
you? Wait. Mr. Buckley, Mr. Marx has indicated that a good element of humor is mockery. Now, you're the editor of the magazine National Review, which I read, and I find a good deal of mockery in that. Would you say that National Review is a funny magazine?
He's turning on you, Willie.
What's that?
He's turning on you.
Well,
A viper in our midst.
That corruption has worked.
I've become partial, I admit it.
That's
Well,
right.
I think that there are funny things in the magazine. Some of them are creative, most of them not at all. If you take a mirror and simply record certain situations, you can call that mirror funny, can't you? Whereas
If I'm
actually,
looking at it,
what funny is simply what it is photographing. Ogden Nash once said that if Hitler and his stormtroopers only had a sense of humor and simply were able to observe themselves, the German people, the whole Nazi movement would collapse with laughter. In that sense, I think the National Review, recording a lot of paradoxes and ironies in our time, can sometimes simply be funny by a mere act of quotation. Mm-hmm. You agree?
Yeah.
Do you find that your readers find the magazine entertaining as well as polemical?
Well, some of them, yeah, not those at whose expense we are being polemical. They tend to be
Sometimes
by
they're
and large,
annoyed.
unamused.
I see.
Ce n'est que la vérité qui blesse.
Are you always consistent in your pieces in the magazine?
Utterly.
Utterly? Even though...
We never forget.
No, that's true. What a slogan that is. Huh?
Mr. Marx, do you agree with Emerson's statement that consistency is the hobgoblin of little minds?
Yeah, but that's what he was accusing me of before, that I wasn't consistent all the time. And I think that does, and I don't see any reason why you have to be consistent.
May I, Mr. Chairman?
Of the broad, I mean.
I would like you to be the 1,001st person whom I have corrected on that quotation. Emerson's quote is a foolish consistency.
I agree. I agree.
Well, do you think that's very polite to take a man who
Like
was
Emerson?
high in the government and ridicule him in front of 8 people?
Well, after all, he's becoming rather inflated after all the things you said about him. I thought it necessary.
Mr. Buckley,
Don't set him down. Don't set him
after all the
down.
nice things that Mr. Marx had
Well,
said,
I
I
had no
took out
choice.
the word foolish.
He's a substantial asset to this show, and I'm never going to watch him
Gee,
unless you're presiding up there. No, you got
Gosh,
something to
gee,
look forward
now
to.
you got me taken aback. But I'm going to ask you a question on a very different subject, Mr. Marx. From time to time, I read about court jesters, and from time to time in plays, I see court jesters. And I've never heard, I'm talking about the Middle Ages and
Yeah,
so forth.
sure. Well, I wish I was at
Kings.
the Middle Ages.
The kings had court jesters around. Now, I have never seen a court jester or heard a court jester make a remark that wasn't ironic, pessimistic, or tragic. Do you
Well,
think
this is
that's
true, because he was constantly, he had to be funny or he lost his job. I remember there was a cartoon in the New Yorker magazine, showed the king and the queen there, and the jesters out there doing all this stuff. And the wife keeps talking, like most wives. They don't shut up, ever. And the king finally hollered over. He says, "Shut up, will you? Jesters don't grow on trees, you know." But I was going to answer you, but I...
Let me ask you another question, Mr. Marx.
Oh, wait, I haven't answered it. Will you
Well,
repeat
go ahead.
the last
It's all right.
question?
Go ahead.
I don't recall precisely what you said. It's an arduous job being a court jester. And as a matter of fact, I was one 2 years ago in London. Mr. and Mrs. Bruce, the American embassy, and I was there every week for dinner. It seems that I was funny the first week. So they invited me back every week. They had a big party every week, and I was the kind of the jester there. I mean, I wasn't George Jessel or anything, but I would say, once I had as my sparring partner or table mate, Mary Churchill. And she told me she was very pretty, and she's very interesting, very bright. And she said, "Oh, my father would have loved you. You're so crazy." As a matter of fact, you know, when Hess landed in Scotland, Churchill was in the projection room at his home on Downing Street watching Duck Soup, the Marx Brothers picture. And they knocked on that iron door, whatever it is, and said, "Hess has just landed in Scotland on a parachute. What shall we do?" And Churchill says, "You keep him there until the picture is over, that's all." But Mary told me, after dinner, you know, the women went over in one room and the men in another room. Then they all converged eventually. And I said, what cigars? Don't they have cigars here? And the butler came in with a box of cigars, and they were each that long, kind Churchill smoked. So I took a cigar, and Mary took a cigar. And I lit her cigar, and I lit mine, and we stood there smoking. She says, "You know, when I used to visit my daddy," she called him, "we would take 2 cigars, and we would bet a pound who could retain the ash on the cigar the longest, and I always beat him, and this drove him crazy." Here's a guy is running the world at that time, and he's worrying about a 12-pound look or something.
Mr. Marx, is your humor...
Just call me Gurley, huh?
No, I'll call you Groucho.
All right, that's better.
Tell me, is your humor spontaneous, or do you think it's...
No, I had this all written by Mr. Riskin this morning. And he made up the whole thing, and otherwise...
You just memorized it, all these things? Or?
Yes, I did. Yes, I do it very swiftly. And I like that when people ask me that. Now I've lost all confidence in you entirely, and I hope that Mr. Buckley gets rid of you and gets somebody who doesn't ask questions like
Now
that.
I'm going to change my position.
Why do you want to humiliate me in front of 9 people? Don't you have questions from the audience?
No, I'm the only person who's asking questions.
This is different than the other shows, huh?
Yeah.
Usually
We're very progressive.
We have Monopoly here.
Oh, I see. I've never played Monopoly. But what is the question you want to ask me?
Well, I'm going to Mr. Buckley now. Mr. Buckley, you quizzed Groucho a good deal on disparaging jokes. What's your view? You think it's that possibly, let us say, a particular group, you're a Catholic, let us say Catholics, have little jokes among themselves which they enjoy by themselves but would not appreciate told in general, before the general public?
Well, I think that it really has to do with as I said a moment ago, the context of the joke, but also the point of the joke. If the point of the joke is to stress a quality that is associated with a particular race or particular religion, which is itself endearing, then that joke seems to be pretty innocuous, pretty harmless. If, however, it is a joke that tends to stress a quality that isn't endearing, for instance, the alleged avarice of the Jew in Merchant of Venice, was obviously something that was the butt in that particular play by Shakespeare of a very searing kind of invidious humor, whereas, let's say, a thrift of the Yankee kind is considered very, very, very endearing, and therefore anything that, or even of the Scottish kind,
they enjoy that kind.
They tend to enjoy a joke. So I think it makes a great deal of difference what it is that is pointed up by that joke.
Well, could I tell you a joke?
Sure.
And I want to know whether you would find this objectionable, since you don't eat meat on Friday. Or is it fish you don't eat? They've switched the whole thing around now. I don't know what it is anymore. Are you able to keep
I'll-
track of these various changes
I'll look it up and drop
in
you
the
a note.
hierarchy? I wish you would. And don't send it collect. I was in Montreal, and a priest comes up to me. And he says, "You're Groucho Marx, aren't you?" And I says, "Yes." He says, "I want to shake your hands, and I want to thank you for all the joy you've put into the world." I says, "And I want to shake your hand and thank you for all the joy you've taken out of it." And he said, "Do you mind if I use that next Sunday in my sermon?" I says, "Fine, I'd love it." I says, "But give me credit and pay 10% to the Morris office." Now, do you find that joke objectionable?
No.
No.
I would find it,
I
however...
could tell you one that you would find objectionable.
I'm sorry.
Would you care to hear that?
Very good. No, but
I
would
could tell
find
you a
it-
very funny one.
We can't because we've run out of time. We just got a queue.
Huh?
No, we just got a queue, unfortunately.
Oh, I got a great joke to tell.
Gentlemen, I'm sorry we can't hear that. We must break.
Thank you, Judge Crater. I thought a lot of Muppets.
Gentlemen, you have answered the subject of discussion, is the world funny? And it's not often that on a TV discussion, the question for discussion is answered.
I don't think we have answered it, have we?
Mr.
I haven't said anything.
Oh, I rule that we have. Mr. Marx gives the proceeds of his books to charity. Proceeds of the sale of the book, Groucho and Me, are given to Cedars of Lebanon. Proceeds of the book, Memoirs of a Mangy Lover, go to the Mount Sinai Hospital of Los Angeles. Proceeds of the book, The Groucho Letters, go to the Rice Davis Clinic. Thank you, Mr. Marx.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank
Senator
you, Mr.
Dodd.
Buckley.
Thank you, Mr. President.
No, not
Now,
that.
in Dodd we trust, and they better not.